Hey, yo, ladies and gentlemen, fellas, let's close out week 11 right here with this Monday Night Football slate. A bunch of Dollarooskies up top to first place tonight, coming here right now to give you the information that you need to try and take down the slate. What we do here is we take every single position, every single player that is going to be noteworthy, that is going to run enough routes, like 5 to 10, that is going to be meaningful enough to keep them on the slate to talk about. Now, normally that's like 30 players, but on this slate, it's actually looking like only 23, 24 players, somewhere around there, because both these teams are very condensed. So we're going to close up week 11 right here. Every single player, I'm going to let you know if I have interest, some interest, or no interest at all early on as I record this at 5 a.m. on Monday. And then later tonight at 6 p.m. East Coast time, we will come back together and go live, and we'll finish up this week. And then we head into the Thanksgiving week where the content for me will start as of today, really looking at the betting stuff for the betting video, looking at DFS. That one, dude, Thanksgiving edition will be out on Wednesday. I'm very excited for a loaded week of Thanksgiving content. And then also we have week 12 right after that. If you have never played a Thursday Thanksgiving slate with the 3 games, my oh my, it is fantastic. There is insane prize pools for each of the Showdown slates, even the Showdown halftime slates. Obviously, the main 3-game slate will have a Millie Maker if you're not already familiar, so it is probably the best slate on the entire year. The NFL playoffs are pretty close as well when it comes to football, but it's very, very good. I'm very excited for it, but we have to get past this Showdown slate, right, to start off the week, so be sure to join us live at 6 p.m. East Coast time. One way to guarantee that you're in there getting smacked by all the information is to hit the like button. That kind of guarantees it, but hitting that notification button after you subscribe to the channel, so doing those things really does help the channel grow. We just crossed 33,000 subscribers yesterday. The goal would be to cross 35,000 by the end of the year, which seems like it's something that we could possibly do with 5 weeks left to go. So I do greatly appreciate everybody in here watching right now. Can't wait for the live stream later. It's some of my favorite content of the entire week when we get to go live, interact with community, and maybe break our record of over 1,800 people concurrent live at the same time in that last live stream on Monday Night Football. Before we get into the video, I have to let you know that this video is going to be sponsored by the presenting sponsor of the show, and that is SuperDraft. If you're not already familiar, I'm sure there's a lot of people playing on there. We had somebody on the Sunday Night Football slate just win second place yet again. That person has won like in each of the last 3 Showdown slates, the top 3 prize pools. He said he plays 10 to 12 lineups a night, so it is very much so possible because there's just less sharks over there. There's less competition. They're focusing on the main slates right now. So for example, SuperDraft, it's a multiplier format. It's not salary cap based. So Tom Brady tonight is a 1x multiplier. If he scores 17 fantasy points, he'll get 17 fantasy points. But for example, Van Jefferson, the wide receiver 4, who's barely on the field for the Rams, and we'll get into that, he has a 3x multiplier tonight. If he ends up finding the end zone and scoring 8 points, he'll actually score 24 points because you multiply it by his 3x multiplier. Now, obviously, that's going to be maybe unlikely, but that's why he has the high multiplier to try and keep him in play. And if you use my name, Sal, upon deposit, they will be giving you a free money bonus up to $1,000 Rooskies in there, and that'll come in a slow drip format just for a little help for you all right now. My top super draft play in the slate tonight at about 26 fantasy points is Chris Godwin. I have him projected for 2.5 more points than anybody else on the entire slate. So if you're signing up, use that code, bam, there you go. You now have the #1 projected play in my model. And then if you want to gain access to the rest of them, you can check it out down below on my Patreon, which we will be referencing tonight for ownership, for projections, for value, and a bunch of other stuff for the Showdown slate and beyond. So let's start this bad boy off when we're looking at Tom Brady. He's the most expensive player on the slate. He's the only guy above $10,000, which is pretty rare on these Showdown slates. You usually see a couple of guys, usually a positional player, a top-end running back, both the quarterbacks. But Tom Brady, the only guy getting that deserving honor tonight. He's not going to have a great pass blocking advantage. These are 2 defenses that are very good. These are 2 defenses that bring pressure. They do well in coverage. They tackle well. Minus 32% pass blocking advantage against the #6 overall pass rush in the Rams for Tom Brady tonight. Brady is attempting the most overall attempts per game now, passing Joey Burrow at 39. Shout out Joey Burrow. Hopefully he recovers quickly from that ACL injury that has ended his rookie season. 336 air yards per game for Brady and 5.2 deep attempts per. Overall, he's going to be #1 in all those categories right now. Top 5 in yards per game, but he's number 24 under pressure, and that's an important stat here. Like if you're looking to get away from Tom Brady for some reason, 1, the matchup itself is saying, okay, you can get away from it. 2, I mean, there's not that many guys projected for over 15 fantasy points tonight, but there's enough that you could fade the most expensive player in the slate, Tom Brady. And this is obviously if you're playing 1 to 3 to 10 lineups and not 150, you're really asking for some trouble if you're playing 150 here, or at least you're realizing that you're taking on a lot of risk. Tom Brady right now for me is going to be a yes, as he is my highest projected player on the slate by about a fantasy point, so it's enough for me to want to get there. That being said, if you're playing in only a couple of lineups, there's merit to actually fading Tom Brady here. 1, you get the salary relief. 2, it's not overwhelmingly more projected than the next couple of guys. And the big thing, number 24 under pressure this year in terms of accuracy for Tom Brady. Just like Jared Goff on the opposite side, both of these quarterbacks really start to struggle when pressured, and both of these defenses are going to be able to get to the quarterback, at least they have so far this year. Next up is Jared Goff, who we get a $1,200 discount on, and I actually currently have as a better play in my Patreon projections, link down below, patreon.com/Sal_Vetri_. I have him as a better play over there than Mr. Thomas Brady if you factor in the salary. So I like him, but he's also going to have a terrible pass blocking advantage, minus 33%. He just lost Andrew Whitworth, one of the best left tackles in the game, definitely his best offensive lineman. That's going to be a huge drop. The man who just signed this offseason to a new contract against Tampa Bay, who's also tied with the Rams right now for top 6 in pass rush in the NFL. You're getting about 4 deep attempts of 20+ yards per game out of Jared Goff, so not the same as Tom Brady, but not that far off. You're getting similar passing yards, 271 per game. You're getting a lot of usage out of Goff, who's been very efficient so far this season, but just like his counterpart in this game, Tom Brady, he does struggle more so when under pressure. Number 17th in the NFL when under pressure. Now he faces a very good pass rush, again without one of his top offensive linemen. He's gone for over 300 yards in back-to-back games, so that's a little bit skewed because they played Seattle in the last game and he had it like almost in the first half, I think, and obviously if you're not going over 300 yards against the Seattle defense this year, there might actually be more fingers pointed at you and what's wrong with you than actually what the defense was doing. So Jared Goff at $9,800. I'm also going to have interest in Jared Goff here. Both quarterbacks are going to be yeses for me, and the reason why both quarterbacks are yeses for me is both of these offenses are pretty condensed, but at the same time spread out. So like each of them have like 3 or 4 weapons in the passing game, and that's all that they use. But between those weapons, it's pretty evenly spread out, maybe outside of one guy in the slate that we can talk about who's a yes for me and a couple of more picks. But at least we know that the quarterbacks throwing those passes are going to accumulate all the points. It doesn't matter where they spread it out. So I could easily see the ball being spread out a bunch of different ways, Goff having 16 to 18 fantasy points, but none of his receivers topping his production. And at $9,800, that's a very fair price point, especially when one of his receivers is only $600 less than him, and that is Cooper Kupp, who will have a nice advantage in the slot tonight against Bunting. It's a positive 33% matchup, and it's going to allow an 88% catch rate in the slot as Bunting so far. You're getting about 8.8 targets per game on a 26% target share for Cooper Kupp this season, playing 55% of his snaps out of the slot, and he's seeing 6+ targets since week 2. Every single game since week 2, he's seeing 6+. He's not a yes for me right now, but he is definitely going to be in play. Peek behind the curtain on Patreon yet again, he's my 4th highest projected player, so he is very close to a yes. The reason why he's not an automatic yes is because his point per dollar value, although it's fine, there's some guys that are cheaper down that I like a little bit more, meaning that his $9,200 price tag, it's basically proper, right? Like if he was $8,500, he'd be too cheap. If he was $9,600, he'd probably be too expensive. Around $9,000 to $9,200 is where I have him being appropriately priced, so it doesn't make him an overwhelming yes for me. Although the projection looks fine and good, it doesn't make him the standout value. Next up, we get Mike Evans, who's a tougher spot against Jalen Ramsey, who has been very good over the last month, had kind of a shaky first month, very good over the past month, allowing just 0.56 yards per cover on the season now. You're getting 6 targets per game right now for Mike Evans, a 17% target share, and he has seen a tick up in the slot, 34%. Now, a lot of that was with Chris Godwin out. You're seeing him move more to the outside now, where he does lead the NFL with 14 red zone targets. He's seen 6 or more targets in 3 straight games and had his season high 11 targets in week 10. So Mike Evans right now at $9,000. It's a similar overall task and discussion about Cooper Kupp, except Mike Evans in general sees less overall volume. Cooper Kupp's at least seeing close to 9 targets per game. Mike Evans in this offense is barely seeing 6 per game, and that's with Chris Godwin missing like 3 to 4 games so far this season. So Mike Evans for me is going to be a maybe. In this price range though, if you're settling between these wide receivers, I would choose Cooper Kupp over Mike Evans right now, as I do have him projecting out higher. Ronald Jones at $8,800. Had that huge, he was like the 4th running back ever to have a 98-yard touchdown run in NFL history, which is pretty crazy to see that one. I think Chris Johnson had like a 99-yard touchdown one time on Thursday Night Football. I remember sitting at my house needing a fantasy football play. I was down like 17 in fantasy, and Chris Johnson comes out and busts out this 99-yard touchdown run on like a Monday or a Thursday Night Football game for the Tennessee Titans. And I'm sitting there in my room screaming up and down as I'm only down by 2 fantasy points. And then you want to hear bad beats ever. I end up taking the lead by like 0.6 fantasy points, right? Like half a fantasy point. And Chris Johnson has a negative 10-yard run, and then he doesn't run again. They like need the clock out after that. They get a first down passing, and I'm sitting there and I lose by 0.4, and I'm like, wait, what just happened? I've never seen a negative 10-yard run since then. I've seen some negative 6s, maybe a negative 8. I've never seen a negative 10-yard run. He was like running backwards to try and run out the clock some more. And I was sitting there like crying in my room like little 15-year-old Sal playing fantasy for like the 1st or 2nd year, jumping up and down, screaming at the TV, smashing stuff, getting all angry, smacking myself. It was terrible. But let's get back to the story here. As Ronald Jones becomes the 4th member, joins Chris Johnson, I think was the last one to do it. He's going to have a negative 3% run blocking advantage here against the Rams, who are 13th overall against the run. He had the big game last week for Ronald Jones. That was the first game in basically a month since Leonard Fournette's been back that he was able to take over some workhorse responsibilities. And I mean, he fumbled early in that game, and they still gave him opportunities because Leonard Fournette couldn't really do much on his opportunities. And then he had the big run, which just kind of said, okay, this is going to be a Ronald Jones game. Had almost 200 yards rushing in that one. He's seen 14 attempts and 3.5 targets per game on the season. And the 23 attempts in week 10 were indeed a season high. But he's been good. Like, I mean, he's been good so far this year. I expect him to continue to get this volume because he's number 9 9 and evaded tackles with 37. He's number 7 in total carries now. Again, Leonard Fournette did miss basically around 3 to 4 weeks with an injury and was banged up. Ronald Jones for me right now is definitely in play. I currently have him and Mike Evans looking very similar tonight. I normally, and they're in a similar price range in terms of projection, normally will lean to the wide receiver there because they're higher variance. They can get those bigger plays quicker. Big plays come in the passing game more so than the running game more frequently, but it's a really tough matchup that you're going to be seeing for Mike Evans against Jalen Ramsey. So right now it's kind of a coin flip between, I'll see what happens later on tonight. You can tune into the stream to see between these guys in this price range who I get more of between Ronald Jones and Michael Evans. Chris Godwin to me at $8,400 is grossly mispriced on this slate. He's going to have a positive 43% matchup, likely the best on the entire slate against Troy Hill tonight. And it's just kind of interesting that he's $8,400. I thought that you might actually see him be $9K or even more than that, maybe like $9,400, and Mike Evans be a little bit cheaper. And based on my projections, he should be more expensive right now because you get Troy Hill allowing 1.14 yards per cover. You're getting 6.8 targets per game on about a 19% target share so far this year for Chris Godwin. He's playing 56% of the time out of the slot, seeing 6+ targets in every single game that he's been healthy this year, and 10 or more fantasy points in every single game except the one against the Packers where he only scored 9.8, and in that one he did get a little bit banged up. But if you're talking about all the games that he actually finished so far this year, he's had 10 or more fantasy points in every single one of them. And if you're talking about those games specifically, I mean, you could look at last week, caught all 6 of his targets for 92 yards, played 91% of the snaps, over 15 fantasy points, over 24 fantasy points the game before that when he was fully healthy in week 7. The entire team stunk, so the only game where he's been actually healthy this year and he didn't do anything was the game against New Orleans where they did nothing, right? They had like a historic low, only 5 rushing attempts in the game for their running backs. You had Chris Godwin being like the leading receiver with 6 targets. He had 3 catches for 41 yards in that game, but he's had at least 14 or more fantasy points, 13.9 to be exact, in all other games. Chris Godwin right now is a yes for me, as I project him for about 7 to 7.5 targets tonight, and based on his high catch rate on the season, I think that is going to be somewhere where I really do like getting to tonight. He is a yes for me at $8,400. Honestly, he might be $1,000 too cheap on this slate. Next up, you get Robert Woods, who's, speaking of $1,000 too cheap, $1,000 discount at least off of his teammate in Cooper Kupp here, who Cooper Kupp is seeing more volume. It's going to be a matchup against Carlton Davis that will be tougher for Robert Woods on the outside than Cooper Kupp's in the slot, so that justifies the price point a little bit there. You're getting a 20% target share for Robert Woods and 6.7 targets per game so far for him right now. A 26% slot percentage. He's averaging 52 yards per game. Robert Woods, kind of like his teammate Cooper Kupp, who's basically seen 6+ targets in every game since week 1. Robert Woods has seen at least 5 targets or more in every single game this year, and he's coming off of back-to-back games with at least 6 or more targets. He's also finding the end zone a lot more this year. If you're just looking at it in terms of rushing touchdowns and things like that, he now, I believe, has 6 total touchdowns on the season, which already is basically like the combination of what he scored the last 2 years in the NFL, and we still have more, around half a season to go. So Robert Woods at $8,200. I actually do like him right now. If I look at Robert Woods, we can pull up right now him on Patreon. You can look at it down below. He's basically like an even play when you factor in the price point with Cooper Kupp. I might still slightly like Cooper Kupp at just a price point of $9,200, but right now I have Robert Woods on Patreon projected for 13.8 fantasy points, which means he's projected for 20 fantasy points over on SuperDraft, which is kind of an average play over there, and a 1.68 value rating. That 1.68 value rating is pretty good for a showdown slate. It is basically like very identical to what Cooper Kupp is, so he looks like a very similar point per dollar play as Cooper Kupp. Not as much as the same projection. Kupp's projected for higher. That's why he's more expensive as well. But Woods will be in play for me. He's close to a yes, but we'll keep him as a maybe. As we go down to $7,800, I think Antonio Brown's probably overpriced in this slate. He'll probably have a positive matchup against Williams, who's been solid in his somewhat limited playing time. 6.5 targets per game so far for Antonio Brown in his 2 games this year, playing 14% of the slot, averaging 29 routes per game in those first 2 weeks. And last week, he actually had a nice game. 7 catches on 69 yards on 8 targets. The issue with Antonio Brown is his price point. I mean, you're getting the number 1 wide receiver, 1A, 1B in Robert Woods with Cooper Kupp being just $400 more expensive. You're getting Chris Godwin, who I consider the number 1 wide receiver on the Buccaneers, at least the way I'm projecting him, for only $600 more. Then you're getting a wide receiver from the Rams who's been acting as the number 1 wide receiver for like 2 or 3 weeks now in the Brandon Cooks role, and Josh Reynolds for $1,000 less. So the issue with Antonio Brown is not his overall projection. I haven't projected out decent for a showdown slate around double-digit fantasy points. The issue is his price tag. I'm paying $7,800 for a number 3 wide receiver who's seeing around number 2 wide receiver volume, but he's also still a number 3 wide receiver. Now he's in a game environment with a really tough matchup from an overall defensive standpoint. So Antonio Brown's probably boom or bust at this price point in terms of you need a touchdown or bust. Like if he's going to go out there for 6 catches for 70 yards for you and have 13 fantasy points, $7,800, that's probably not even that great for you, honestly. Like it might not win you a slate if somebody else above him or even below him is doing similar or better. So you probably need a touchdown out of AB here. I don't think it's completely out of the question, but if I'm trying to cater this video to people who play 150 lineups, especially the stream later today, you can ask my questions on my 150 lineup builds. You can ask questions in terms of just MMEing on a showdown slate in general. It's all Q&A based later on 6 p.m. tonight, East Coast time. Be sure to hit that notification bell and subscribe button so you can be notified of when it starts. But Antonio Brown, if I'm just trying to cater to the audience of a couple lineups, he's actually going to be a no for me in this price range. His value is just nowhere near these other guys. Antonio Brown currently for me, if I look at his value value relative to other players in the slate. He's actually my third overall worst play in the slate from a point per dollar standpoint. Now, next up is Josh Reynolds, who won't be as bad, and it will be actually somebody that I have some interest in on this slate. Josh Reynolds, for me, is somebody that stands out as somebody who's been very good over the last couple of weeks. He's taking on this Brandon Cooks role to the fullest extent. Josh Reynolds will likely see Jamal Dean, though, who's been one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL this season. It's going to be a negative 23% matchup for Josh Reynolds. Dean's allowing just 0.82 yards per coverage so far this year. Now, Reynolds is averaging 5.3 targets per game, and over the last couple of games, he's been overdoing that 5.3 per game. Last 3 games since week 7, 8 targets, 9 targets, and 10 targets. Fantasy points in those games, 15.2, 8.4, and 17.4, which is now the highest he's had all season long. That was in week 10 on 8 catches for 94 yards and 101 air yards, the first time he's topped 100 air yards so far this season. 3 straight games with 8 or more targets for the man himself and Josh Reynolds. He's firmly in play for me, very close to a yes, and on Superdraft at a 2.1 multiplier, he actually looks pretty good over there. I like him on both of these sites right now, but if you're looking on Superdraft, he actually looks like more of a play and more of an interest to me over on Superdraft. Rob Gronkowski is seeing a 13% target share on 5 targets per game so far this season. Rob Gronkowski will have a huge matchup advantage against Kenny Young, who Kenny Young guarding tight ends has not been good, allowing an 85% catch rate, allowing over 1.3 yards per cover. Basically, if you're allowing like over 1.15 or 1.2 yards per cover, it starts to become an issue. Anything below 1 is very good, like a lot of these Tampa Bay cornerbacks and a lot of the Rams cornerbacks for the most part. Kenny Young against tight ends has not been that great. Now, Rob Gronkowski has basically been pretty hit or miss. We had him a couple weeks back against New Orleans, where the whole team kind of laid an egg. He's been very touchdown or bust because he scored touchdowns in 4 out of his last 5 games. Every single one of those games he scored touchdowns in. He's basically scored double-digit fantasy points. Only 1 game this year has he scored double-digit fantasy points without a touchdown. That was week 3 against Denver, where he caught 6 of 7 targets for 48 yards. Now, based on where his usage is, especially downfield, Rob Gronkowski is going to either have to see a lot of targets, which he hasn't seen that much of since week 6 and week 7, where he saw 8 each. Since then, 4 targets, 6 targets, and 3 targets, or he's going to have to find the end zone, which he's doing a lot of. 4 touchdowns in his last 5 games right now, because he doesn't usually get there in the air. Like, if he's going to not score a touchdown tonight, odds are he scores like probably 8 fantasy points, and at $6,200, you can probably get that out of a kicker for $2,000 less. Again, if you're playing 150 lineups, I'll do this right now in the YouTube video. He's going to be in play. I put him as an X, which means I mark him for my player pool. He's not a yes, but he's just in my player pool. If you're only playing a couple of lineups, Gronk is probably a no. Now, he has 2 touchdown upside, so I'll keep him as an X because he's definitely going to be in my player pool, but he does not grade out all that great point per dollar wise, and he's probably a touchdown or bust on this slate. The upside is he's a very live player, one of the best players in the entire game to actually score a touchdown tonight. Next up, we kind of hit this dead range in the 5K range right now of $5,800. It's basically the Rams running game. $5,800 Darrell Henderson, who in week 10 played 35% of the snaps, ran 11 routes, had 8 touches for 33 yards and a touchdown. He's had 9+ touches in 9 straight games. And last week's game was the first time he's gone below 9 touches all year long, I believe, where he only had 8, averaging 3.7 red zone touches per game as top 5 in the NFL. The issue now is Cam Akers is getting involved. Akers a month ago wasn't playing, and you could rely on Henderson to maybe see 15 touches. Now with Akers playing in back-to-back games, seeing around 8 to 10 touches, you're getting Henderson around 8 to 10 touches himself, and paying $5,800 to hope that you luck box 2 touchdowns on 8 to 10 rushing attempts is not something I want to do. So Henderson early on is a no for me. And speaking of luck boxing 2 touchdowns, you could just look at what happened last week. On 8 touches for 51 yards, you have Malcolm Brown doing exactly that. He had 2 touchdowns, luck box his way into it. He'll face, just like Darrell Henderson, the number 6 overall run defense in Tampa. It'll be a negative 1% run blocking advantage that I expect to get even worse with Windworth being out in this game. So now Malcolm Brown is kind of artificially priced here because if he doesn't fall in the end zone last week and just has 8 attempts for 50 yards and 5 fantasy points, he's probably in like the 3 or 4K range. But at $5,400, you're banking on another 1 to 2 touchdown performance out of him, and that's not something that I want to rely on as this messy backfield gets even messier with Cam Akers heavily involved. So both of those guys in the 5K range right now are going to be no's for me. You kind of can see that you get this dead range, right? You get Robert Woods at $8,200, and then Antonio Brown, who's basically overpriced, like we said. Then you get a decent play at $6,800 and Josh Reynolds, and then you get Rob Gronkowski, who we're kind of weary of from a touchdown or bust standpoint at that price point. And then like basically from Gronk's price point of $6,500 range and below, it starts to get really, really sketchy. You have $4,800 Tyler Higbee up next, who in week 10 played 86% of the snaps. He caught 3 passes for 60 yards in that game. And this is going to be somebody, Tyler Higbee, that again is going to be touchdown or bust. But at least in Tyler Higbee's case, you're getting a lot cheaper of a price point than Gronk. A $1,400 price discount. The only difference is Tyler Higbee doesn't see red zone targets, has not seen a red zone target since week 4, and only has 3 red zone targets on the entire season, where Gronk obviously has a lot more than that. In this last game, he did have a season-high 6 targets on just 18 routes run. I expect Higbee to run somewhere around 20 routes. He also had a season-high 76 air yards. A lot of that came on his one long reception of like, I believe, 30-plus yards in the game. So Higbee at $4,800, again, somebody that doesn't stand out as a great play for me. He'll be in play, though, because he is touchdown or bust, and at this price point, close to the kickers at least, or closer, if he finds the end zone, 2 catches, 30 yards, and a touchdown, it's going to be enough for you on a showdown slate. Just keep in mind, though, that he's one of these looser plays, and the only reason we have interest in him is because we're kind of scratching for value on this slate, and there's not that great of a mid-range as we just discussed. So Tyler Higbee for me right now, like, he looks like one of my worst 6 or 7 values in the slate, but again, touchdown or bust changes his value. Like, if I project him for a half of more of a touchdown, it changes his value to being like a pretty decent play at this price tag. Somebody who I do think is a decent play and might go overlooked is Leonard Fournette because of how good Ronald Jones was last week. Look, Ronald Jones was great last week. I don't expect Ronald Jones to have a 98-plus yard touchdown run, so it doesn't keep as much off the field. Leonard Fournette, the man who's still running a lot of routes and still being used heavily in the passing game, which is exactly what you want to see if you're talking about showdown slates or just in general when rostering any type of running back, having the on-the-ground usage, but the upside in the passing game for those easy PPR points. And in week 10, Leonard Fournette went out there, played just 38% of the snaps, the least he's played in any healthy game so far this season when he's been fully healthy. He totaled in that game 11 opportunities, 2 receptions as well, 30 total yards, and just 5 fantasy points. The concern that I'm seeing, though, Leonard Fournette since week 8, when he ran a season-high 25 routes, ended up in that game seeing 6 targets against the Giants. Since then, 15 routes against New Orleans when they were trailing the entire game. That's somewhat concerning. And just 12 routes last week when he was off the field more so. Makes sense because he's not on the field as much when Ronald Jones gets going. I expect that number to boomerang hopefully back towards the 18 to 20 range. And if it does, I think we have a value in Leonard Fournette at $4,400. You're basically getting 15 routes per game, and the 11.5% target share is what I like to see. If we can get Brady to throw 35 to 40 times tonight, you're looking at 3 to 5 targets for Leonard Fournette, which at this $4,400 price tag and throwing to the running backs leads to a higher catch percentage. If you can get 3 to 4 receptions out of Leonard Fournette tonight, and if that translates to, let's just say, 20 to 30 yards, and just in the passing game alone, you're looking at around 6 or 7 fantasy points, you're basically getting a kicker production at this price range, but the obvious upside of touchdowns, the obvious upside of anything that he does on the ground as well. So Leonard Fournette at $4,400 does look like one of the better values on this slate because we just don't have that much value. A lot of the good players are properly priced above $6,000 and really above $8,000 on this slate. We now get into the kickers who are in play. They're going to give you decent value on the slate. They're going to project out nicely as the total is around 48. It's going to be like average projections, 7 to 8 fantasy points. If you want to get to the kickers, that's fine. Just keep an eye on what's happening with the Rams kicker. Matt Gay has been designated to return. They're saying that he should be the starter tonight, but it's no guarantee. So we might have to actually wait until later on for inactives and actives to see who's going to be the kicker tonight for the Rams. He's not currently on Superdraft. I'm sure they'll add him hopefully by later tonight if he is indeed the kicker. But if he's not going to be the starting kicker tonight, we'll have that news later on. I'll update it over on Patreon. The defenses are actually going to be live tonight because they're cheap, right? The Buccaneers defense at $3,800. They're the number 2 overall defense. They're basically top 5 in every category outside of tackling. Top 5 pass rush, top 5 in coverage, number 6 against the run. They're in play at $3,800. They can bring pressure on Jared Goff, who is prone to making a lot of mistakes under pressure. So they're strongly in play. I would prefer the Bucs defense over both kickers on this slate due to the upside of scoring a touchdown. And Tom Brady has thrown pick sixes. Yes, multiple pick sixes so far this season. So the Rams rank 4th overall in defense. They're right there. 2 top 5 defenses going at it tonight, according to Pro Football Focus. They're 6th in pass rush, 6th in coverage, top 10 in tackling, and borderline in top half of the league, borderline top 10 against the run. So Rams defense at $3,000 also in play just due to the lack of skill position value that we're going to find down here. And now as I scroll down to finish up the last couple of guys on this, please do, as we finish up the show, hit the like and subscribe button. I greatly appreciate that. A ton of work is going to be going out. I'm going to be creating about 5 or 6 pieces of content on Monday, Tuesday, and very early on Wednesday, probably 2 or 3 a.m. before I have to catch my flight to try and back everything up for this week so I can enjoy Thanksgiving without doing any work. Hopefully, we'll see. If you appreciate all the efforts, if you appreciate all the content, it's just a one-man band here. I really do appreciate you hitting that like button for me and the big old subscribe button. And also, if you're still watching to this point and you have like 30 seconds of your time either now or after, if you have your phone next to you, going to the Vetri show on your Android device on Stitcher or on the Apple iTunes podcast store and just leaving a 5-star rating and review. We're over 550 reviews now, and the more reviews we get, the higher we climb up the rankings. We're like 32nd overall on the podcast streak, which is very good for a one-man band here. Because we're battling up and punching up towards all these ESPN and CBS and Pro Football Focus NBC-based podcasts that have huge backings and huge corporations, and maybe we can crack into that top 20 and start making some sound waves so people can notice us a little bit more. A lot of people are noticing us on YouTube, but let's start to crack into them podcast streets as well. So I appreciate you. It's all based on the community and the power that you guys can do there by leaving those 5-star ratings and reviews. Thank you so much in advance. Cam Akers at $2,800. If there's a single player that I'm actually touching in this backfield, it's going to be Cam Akers because he's just so cheap. Look, in the last 2 games, his usage, 19 attempts and 1 reception. So 20 overall touches in the last 2 games alone. That's basically what you're seeing out of these other Rams running backs. He's totaled 92 yards, and he's seen a 23% and 27% snap share in the last 2 games. Now, he says not top 6.4 fantasy points in a game at all, or over 30% of the snaps since week 1. What you're basically looking at here is hoping to get around 25 to 30% of the snaps for Cam Akers, hoping to get 6 to 8 to maybe 10 touches like you've been seeing out of these last 2 weeks on average out of him. And if that's the case, some come in the receiving game, runs about 10 or 12 routes, and maybe you get the touchdown. At $2,800, he'll probably project out for me right now if I look over on my Patreon, a little peek behind the curtain yet again, patreon.com/Sal_Vetri_ to get the projections, rankings, ownership, all that stuff for tonight. You can follow along down down below. I have Cam Akers projected for 4.9 fantasy points. That's his median projection. The obvious ceiling is if he catches an extra pass or breaks off a longer run or has a touchdown. So he's in play for me. Gerald Everett at this price point as well is also going to be in play for me. I have him projected very similarly to Cam Akers for a little bit cheaper, seeing about 3.8 targets per game. He was getting a little bit more usage when Tyler Higbee was out. Higbee came back in that last game. You saw the usage drop for Gerald Everett, but at $2,600, he'll remain in play on a showdown slate. He has at least one catch in every game and at least 2 catches in 4 straight games. Cameron Brate, probably the lowest I'd go on this slate at $2,200. I do prefer Gerald Everett. You're getting about 2 targets per game for Cameron Brate. A couple things to keep in mind, though, for Cameron Brate in terms of how much more he's been used since a couple of injuries started to happen. The concern now is that AB is back, and they're just going to go a lot of 4 wide receiver sets and not have to go with 2 tight end sets on the field as much. But Cameron Brate is coming off of a 38.2% snap share. That's the second most snaps and his second most routes run with 12 in that last game against Carolina. He saw 3 catches, which was his second most on the year, on 3 targets, 31 yards, and a touchdown, which was nice to see, for over 12 fantasy points. Cameron Brate now has back-to-back games of at least 5.5 or more fantasy points. The concern is, though, that he's not running a lot of routes. We saw 12 in the last game. Was it because they were pretty easily leading in the second half and they put him on the field for a couple more snaps? Because in the 2 games before that, he only saw 10 total routes run, so that's your concern right there. But he did finish as the tight end 4 last week. That's how easy it is to be a top 5 tight end. You just got to run 12 routes and have 3 targets in this 2020 NFL season. Cam Brate is in play for me, but he's not somebody that I'm trying to die to get to. He's not going to be George Little's pick from last time. He's not going to be my pick tonight for the backup tight end that we're going for. I'd actually choose Gerald Everett over Cam Brate tonight. Both are in play. No interest in Scotty Miller, as he's now going to be the wide receiver 4 and not running that many routes. Only ran 6 routes last week. And in the 2 games since AB has been here, he's basically only ran 22 routes and seen 4 targets, 2 catches for 14 yards. No interest for me. And then Van Jefferson, who basically since week 2, his usage has just crashed. Week 1, he saw 17 routes and 3 targets. Since then, he only has 1 game over 5 routes run since week 2. On the season, since week 2, 5 catches on 5 targets for 60 yards over the last 4 games. Expect around 5 routes run or less unless there's an injury tonight, especially with the evolution and the advancement in the skill set of Josh Reynolds. So you're going to have a no for me for Van Jefferson. So thank you so much for tuning into the Monday Night Football video. Again, join us live tonight by hitting that like, subscribe, and the notification bell to be notified of when the video starts at 6 p.m. East Coast time, where you can ask your questions on my 150 max builds, your specific lineups, whatever you might have later on tonight. Thank you so much in advance. Check out my Patreon for more information, projections, rankings, ownership. The more informed you are, the better the chance. The more schmacked you get by the information, the better chance you have at actually taking down a slate. Patreon.com/Sal_Vetri_ to check that out. Support the sponsor of the show, Superdraft, for a free money bonus up to $1,000 Rooskies. You can use the promo code SAL, SAL, to get in there. My top Superdraft plays of the slate. I'll give you another one if you made it this far. Number 1 is Chris Godwin. Number 2 is Josh Reynolds tonight. Thank you so much, everybody, and I'll see you at 6 p.m. tonight. Peace out, gang, and have a great rest of your day.